Welcome to Crackit. Today we are going to discuss about the Spring Boot annotations. This is part 4 of the Spring Boot annotation series. You can go through the previous 3 parts if you want. I'll pin the part 3 link here. You can go and check if you want. So in this annotation series we are going to cover at repository, at request body, at service and at path variable annotations today. And we will try to understand it using the coding examples to understand and answer the interview questions really well. We have launched this channel new, so we request you to support us with your likes, shares and subscriptions if you like the content. Let's now discuss at request body annotation. What is it doing? So at request body annotation, if we used it with the request body, this annotation will automatically read the input and deserializes into the object using the HTTP message reader. So what is it? So my input, I will suppose thing from the RESTful way wherein I will pass my input as a JSON object from my postman. How does it get converted into the model object of the Java class? That is through this at request body. There is no need for us to convert that JSON object into the specified object using some code. No, that is not required. Who is doing it? This at request body is doing it. How is it doing? It is doing with the help of the HTTP message reader. Also, this at request body annotation can be used along with at valid annotation or at validated annotation. What will these two annotations will do? These two annotations will perform the validation for the bean, that is the request body that we provided. If the validation fails, this at valid and the at validated annotation will throw the web exchange bind exception. What is that? Saying that there is some validation error in the request body that has been sent. So the user has to check the request body on what is the validation error that they have got, and it will return the response as a 400 bad request. We will cover what is at valid annotation, what is at validated annotation, what is the difference between at valid and validated, when to use at valid and validated in our future videos. I'm using the same project that we created in our previous video to explain few other annotations today as well. So if you see here, the port is 8081, which we changed yesterday from 8080 to 8081 to illustrate the server port change example. So I'm using the same thing here. The only change is I have added this piece of code here. What is this? I have added this at post mapping annotation for the save Crackit method. What is this at post mapping? It is nothing but the specialization of the at request mapping. We already discussed it, and I'm passing a request body here. What is it? That is a Crackit object. And what will this at request body do? For now, in this example, I am passing my input as a JSON from the postman. So this at request body annotation will convert that JSON into this Crackit object. I will not write any fancy code to convert that JSON object to this Crackit object. This at request body annotation will perform that operation. Let's see whether this is working or not. This is my postman, and from here only I'm going to send my post request. If you see here, my HTTP method is post and my URL is annotations demo Crackit, and I am passing the Crackit as my request body. If you see here, ID, name, playlist name and views we are passing. Let's see what happens. So if you see here, we are getting the same Crackit object as a response with HTTP status code 200 OK. How can I say that this went and come back hitting that method? Because I have set the value of view to this value from 10,000. If you see here in our example, I am setting the value to the value what we see here. Did I change the JSON to the Crackit object? No, I'm not doing it. Who's doing it? At request body is doing it. So what is this at service annotation? This at service annotation is a specialization of the at component annotation. It doesn't have any additional responsibilities other than that of what at component does, but it is always good to have at service on the service layers. What will our service layer do? Our service layer will do the business functionalities. Also, like at component, if we provide at service to our classes, that classes will get auto detected during the annotation based configuration class path scanning. What is at repository annotation? At repository annotation is a specialization of the at component annotation. Now we know that at controller, at service, and at repository, all these three annotations are the specializations of this at component annotation. And this will do the same functionality, like will have the similar use and functionality as at repository annotation, and we will use this at repository annotation on top of the data access objects, which is our DAO classes. At repository annotation has a very special use other than importing the DAOs into the DI container. What is that special use? It is nothing but this at repository annotation will translate all my unchecked exceptions into the Spring's data access exception. So, for example, what does that mean? Let's try to understand. I have a query and that may throw SQL exception. Do I need to put that into a try catch block? No, that is not the case. Why? If I use at repository annotation in my DAO classes, that is not required. Why? This at repository annotation internally that will translate my SQL exception into a data access exception. What is it? It is a runtime exception. So there's no need for mandatory for me to write a try catch block over there. So this eradicates the need for the developers to write code to handle the exceptions that is thrown by the DAO layer easily. It saves the life of the developers in handling the exception. So I have made a few changes to this Crackit project to illustrate at service at repository annotations. So what I have did is, like, I have changed this post method to call the service layer, wherein if you see here I have written at service annotation. What will this at service annotation do? This will do the same as the at component annotation, because this is the specialization of at component annotation. If you see here I have added a repository interface as well. What will this at repository will do? This at repository annotation is a specialization of at component. Apart from that, it will handle it will do the exception handling for me in this DAO layer. So this is my repository. What I am doing, if suppose a request body comes with Crackit object, I am saving it to a database. I am using the same project that we created, so it will have by default H2 database. So I am using that H2 database to save my Crackit object now. I have modified this find by ID as well. I have modified this get mapping as well to fetch the ID that we saved. What I am doing, so if the ID is found, I am returning that. If it is not found, I am returning null. Let's see what happens by executing this program. So I'll open the Postman. So I came here and I am trying to save with ID as 2, ID as 1. So if you see here, I'm getting 200 OK, which means that this object is got saved into the database. How can I prove that this object got saved into the database? So I'm using this get mapping and I'm sending with the ID 2. So if you see our code here, in our controller, I have sent this ID as a path variable here. What is this path variable? That we can send as a part of the URL. So I am passing that to find my ID. So if I send 2 here, I am able to get that ID from the H2 database that I have in my local. So if suppose I pass 1, I am able to fetch that 1 as well. So with this we came to an end of the coding example of at get mapping, at post mapping, at request body, at path variable, at service, and at repository annotations. We will cover at valid, at validated, what is the difference between two in our next video, along with few other interview questions. Thanks for watching Crackit. Please support us with your likes, shares and subscriptions. Stay tuned for updates.